As we know, the world is facing the crisis due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The Canada is also facing the economical and the social crisis due to this pandemic. So, to reduce the COVID 19 havoc across the country, the Canadian government came up with some measures regarding the COVID 19 vaccinations and quarantine protocol. Due to these new rules of vaccination mandates and the other health restriction, Canadian truckers started protesting against it. And the protest was given a name called the Freedom Convoy. They, along with truckers, the normal Canadian population also joined in. The thousands of protesters gathered on the Parliament Hill in Ontario, calling an end to the new mandate. Hello everyone, welcome to the Power Academy. In this topic, we will going to discuss the Canadian Emergency Act, why Canadian government invoked it. These are the things will going to be discussed in this topic. First, we should know that why this protest actually began in the first place. The movement was sparked by the vaccine mandate for the truckers crossing the US-Canada border implemented by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's Liberal government earlier this month. According to the new measures, the unvaccinated Canadian truckers, those who are coming US and the Canada border, have to go through the home quarantine once they have returned home. That is why a loose coalitions of the truckers and the conservative groups began to organize the cross-country drive that began in the Western Canada. It picked up steam and gathered support as it drove east. The many supporters already oppose the Mr. Trudeau's politics regarding the pandemic measures. People are frustrated with the pandemic measures, and the Canadian population now do not want the government to intervene in their personal life as the government doing since the inception of the pandemic. And the Canadian populations are frustrated, exhausted about their personal and the economical debacle over these kind of measures, and the government is taking these kind of measures, making their life worse. That is why they have started this kind of protest, and that is why the Canadian truckers actually started this protest. After that, the Canadian peoples, the ordinary people, came into and joined this protest and supported them by donating the money, by donating the different other measures that are required to survive in such an cold weather. Now the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau activated rarely used emergency powers in an effort to end the protest that have shut some US border crossing and paralyzed the part of the capital. By activating these emergency powers, the government is trying to punish the protester harshly, and they are also trying to end the protest forcefully. So, the purpose of this activating this Emergency Act 1988 is that the Canadian government wants to end this protest, by forcefully by using some measures which is very harsh and hard. So we need to know what is the Emergency Act of the 1988 and the what kind of power the Trudeau will going to use by using this Emergency Act. The Emergency Act was passed in 1988, as I said. By using this act, the government give itself some added power during the time of national crisis, because the Trudeau considered this protest, this peaceful protest, as a national crisis. The Emergencies Act outlines 4 different types of emergencies. The first one is public welfare emergencies. The second one is public order emergencies. The third one is international emergencies. And fourth one is war emergencies. By using this Emergency Act, the Cabinet may only invoke the legislation if the emergency cannot be addressed by an existing federal law, and it gives the exceeding capacity to the provinces to handle it effectively. The legislation invoked, then it will likely be under the public order. Under this public order, criteria is very strict. The lawful protests are not allowed under this criteria. So Canadian government is trying to crush the peaceful protest forcefully by autocratic way. So this is an autocratic way. The emergency is like an autocratic way. India also faced this kind of emergency in 1970s. So these are the autocratic measures, and these kind of emergencies the Trudeau is actually using to quell the protest, to forcefully end the protest. The Canadian government, considering these lawful protests as a threat to the security of the Canada, and the security defined by the Canadian Security Intelligence Services Act. And these laws outline the four possible scenarios. The first scenario is espionage and the sabotage. The second is foreign influence activities. The third one is threat or use of the acts of serious violence for the political, religious, or the ideological activities. And the last one is the covert, unlawful act intended to undermine or overthrow the constitutionally established government. But according to the civil societies, these protests have not yet violated any rule except the blockade of the roads and the blockade of the bridges. So these four possible scenarios are not properly applicable through the Emergency Act. So the Trudeau has actually activated this by quelling this protest forcefully. Although to invoke this law, the Prime Minister must also consult with the primers of the only impacted provinces before putting the move before the Parliament. So Trudeau have to take the permissions from the affected provinces, and then the parliamentary nod is actually needed to use these laws under the Emergency Act. And using this law, the Trudeau government can threaten to tow away the vehicles to keep the essential services running. Second one is the government can freeze the truckers' personals and the cooperative bank accounts and take the further action to strike at their livelihoods and the sources of their financial support. So these are the very, very violated order. This will going to violate the livelihood of the truckers, those who are protesting against the government measures. So these kind of things are not welcome in a country which is democratic in nature. And this law gives the authorities the power to cut off the protest funding. The Canadian government is trying to cripple this movement since the inception by cutting off the funding. The Canadian authorities already froze the money flown which were coming from the US supporters. Toronto Dominion Bank already froze the two personal accounts that received $1.1 million for the protesters. So Canadian government is trying to stop this protest. Initially they actually tried to stop this protest by cutting off the funding. A US based website which is Give Send Go became a prime conduit for the money to the protester after the mainstream crowdfunding platform GoFundMe blocked the donation to the group. And there are so many other renowned personality actually supported this kind of protest. This protest actually. The Donald Trump's son also supported this protest. Elon Musk also supporting this protest. The Ontario court last week ordered the Give Send Go website to freeze all the funds supporting the blockade, but it had not been complied yet because this is a peaceful protest. This protest has not yet violated any kind of rule regarding the Canadian Constitution. So this is an legal protest by the ordinary people of the Canada and ordinary truckers of the Canada. So the Canadian government have to give them some space. Due to this kind of movement from the government counterpart, Canadian Prime Minister criticized. He faced the criticism all across the world. Every civil society of his country and every civil societies of the other parts of the world have criticized this move taken by the Canadian Prime Minister, because this is the move first time any Prime Minister using this. Before this law, the old Emergency Act, which actually was the Wire Measurement Act, invoked by the Trudeau's father, the Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau, to stop the wave of the violence by the hardline Quebec supporters. The period was known as an October crisis, when the Trudeau's father, who actually was the Prime Minister in 1970s, is actually invoked this law to stop the Quebec separatists. This was then valid reasons, but this is not the reasons the Trudeau has to invoke such kind of emergency act. This is a peaceful act. So these laws are only meant for the harsh and the violated emergency situation, but this time isn't peaceful protest is going on. So the Trudeau has been criticized by the civil liberty groups. As I said, so many civil liberties groups, so many democratic minded countries have also also criticized this move. The Prime Minister never cared to talk about the protester. He described the protester as in fringe minority groups. And the Trudeau basically invoked the emergency to clear the Ambassador Bridge connected between the USA and the Canada, because this bridge is very essential for the USA-Canada economy, because this bridge actually supporter of the export import between the Canada and the USA. The main businesses is being going on through this bridge. So that is why this bridge is very important. And that is why Trudeau invoked this emergency act to clear the bridges. There are so many other small bridges that and those bridges are under the blockade still now. And the Trudeau need to talk to the protesters and have to give them some relief. Instead of lecturing the other countries, he have to deal with its own protester, have to deal with the protester amicably. When in India, the farmer protester, the so-called farmer protest was going on, then the Trudeau lecturing India that the Indian government have to talk to the protesters. And the Indian government talked to the protester 11 times. Indian government invited the farmer protester 11 times to placate the situation. But the Canadian Prime Minister were lecturing the India that the Indian Prime Minister should talk with them and have to revoke the law. But now he is taking the same path. He is not revoking the law, but the Indian Prime Minister have took them decision to revoke the law after 1 year, but he revoked the law. But the Trudeau is not revoking the law. He is taking carrot and the sticks policy. So he have to talk with the protester, have to solve these things amicably. This is what have to do. Before lecturing other countries like India, they have to take their measures by their own decision. So now the first question is, which of the following is the largest port of the Canada? The first option is Vancouver, second option is Montreal, third option is Port of Prince Rupert, and the fourth option is Port of Halifax. The second question is, length of the international border Canada shares with USA is. The first option is 8,890 km. Second option is 8,990 km. Third option is 8,891 km. Fourth option is 8,892 km. If anyone wants to ask me any questions, or if anyone wants to ask me any questions regarding the previous topics, then you can mail me. My email address is tuhin.power.academy@gmail.com. Thank you very much. Thank you for your support and thank you for your attention.